All right, hey, how you doing? It is now a day or two after the election. That was entertaining, um, and I actually had a request. Thank you to talk a little bit about sociology and how it thinks about religion um, in terms of theory. So hopefully this one doesn't go too long, but there's some fun stuff. We've touched on it, but I would like to delve a little bit deeper into um, what all we've got. Okay, uh, technically we would call religion and sociology the sociology of religion. It's its own subfield. One of my colleagues in grad school is actually down in Baylor, and he's done pretty well for himself writing about sociology of religion. If you want to go Google him up, his name is Jerry Park, Dr. Jerry Park, and last I checked, he was at Baylor down in Texas. Uh, Baylor's got a sociology of religion focus in their sociology department, and um, perhaps unsurprisingly, Notre Dame had a religion focus in their sociology department, which is uh, which may be why Jerry went there. I don't know. I just knew him because he was in my class. Uh, there were seven of us. Anyway, um, so go Google up Jerry, see what he's written, and there's some others, but it's not a field that I have delved into, so I'm not up on who the newest folks are. Christian Smith is a name that floats around. I think Jerry worked with him a little bit. Um, when I went through school, granted it was last century, my undergrad was a Catholic college, and so I took a sociology of religion class then, but that was, 5 or 10 years ago. And so the characters at that time were Rodney Stark and Robert Wethno. I can't imagine either of them are still alive. And then Peter Berger may have done some religion stuff. I know he has an appointment at, he recently passed, an appointment at Baylor also. But it somehow or other, it wasn't the kind of appointment where he actually went in, because Jerry did not get to talk to him, he said. Now, we didn't talk about who was I just mentioning, Berger, yet, even though I meant to in the cultural section. But Berger, you know what? We'll do that a different time. Okay, so religion and God in sociology. So I'm going to start with Marx. I'm going to go to Weber, and then Durkheim, and then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the newer stuff is. Okay, so so Marx is the one who is famous for saying religion is the opiate of the masses, and communities, societies that have tried to build something off of Marx, most famously the Soviet Union, are, or tend to be aggressively anti-religious. Now, why would Marx say something like religion is the opiate of the masses? It's definitely a strong statement. So recall that for Marx, everything stems from the economy, right? The economy comes first. It's how we make our living. It's how we get our food. It's how we build our homes. And the economy drives everything else. So consequently, culture serves the economy. You're not going to have a culture that tears down the economy, because in Marx's world, that's not anything you're going to have. So religion being part of culture, Marx saw religion as serving the status quo, the powerful interests of the day. And Marx was talking about the Christian countries in Europe. Now, Christianity, the Bible is full of, you know, um, well, let me restate that. Uh, let's start with, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So, there are elements in, there are teachings in Christianity that if you're poor and miserable, that's not a terrible thing, because even if you suffer in this life, in the next life you'll be better off, right? That's where the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So that you wouldn't want to be rich and powerful, because you're going to have a hard time getting into heaven. Easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than the rich man to get into heaven. Or the stories about in the afterlife, the poor eating at God's table, while the rich are begging, please just throw us some scraps. So from Marx's perspective, all of these teachings served to keep people happy that they're not well off, right? And Marx was just a flat atheist. He didn't think there was anything in the afterlife. So in his perspective, these are all fairy tales that are made up to keep people happy where they're at, or at least to keep them from revolting, because as we also talked about, in industrial capitalist societies, the whole thing rests upon those of us who are working people and not owners continuing to go to work and not revolting against the owners. So, it's important to have a religious system that supports that status quo. And, I'm no biblical scholar, I'm not going to pretend to be, but there have been, and that means that you're going to have to double check anything that you truly want to know. But all sorts of obnoxious arrangements, social arrangements, including slavery, have been at times supported by people using Christianity and the Bible in a way that made it so they should be the ones on top, and those other people should remember their place and just be happy where they're at. So that's Marx. Marx is the opiate of the masses. I feel like I should say something about Nietzsche too while I'm here. Nietzsche's got this famous line, which they made into a really bad movie a couple of years ago. Maybe it isn't bad, I shouldn't say that. They made it into a movie a couple of years ago called God's Not Dead. Well, Nietzsche's perspective, Nietzsche did say God was dead. And when I was in college, somebody had a t-shirt that said, God's not, like a quote, God's not dead, Nietzsche. And then Nietzsche is dead, God. That was funny. But you really have to delve into a little bit what God is dead means. But recall Nietzsche's writing, at the turn of the last century. We're going through, we're 50 years past Marx's industrialization, and the world is progressing at breakneck speed. And hold on a sec. Okay, I wanted to check his years. So he was born in 1844, and he died in 1900. Marx was writing, I don't remember exactly when Marx died, but the publication of the Communist Manifesto was like 1835, 1850, somewhere in there. So Nietzsche's overlapping a little bit with the tail end of Marx's life, and he's writing all the way up through the 1900s. The reason I wanted to check was because, by 1918, the entire world fell apart for the Europeans with the First World War, and that was destabilizing for all of them. But at any rate, science is moving, industrialization is moving along, the world is progressing at breakneck pace, and and Nietzsche looked at the world that he saw all of these changes going on, and um, and saw that we didn't use religion the way we had in the past, right? Now, this is something that Durkheim has talked about. He wasn't nearly as, avowedly anti-religious as Marx, but I mean, that's a pretty high bar. But he did see that the sense of community, the sense of moral guidance that religion would provide wasn't necessarily there. And so he said, God is dead. And what he meant by that was that we have killed him. We didn't need God anymore the way we had once needed God, right? So whether or not God exists has nothing to do with what Nietzsche was actually saying. What Nietzsche was talking about was the role of God in our human lives and how we think of God. Almost, if you will, the social construction of God that we use together. The other element that Nietzsche talked about was he had this idea of the Übermensch, the Uberman, and the Overman. And that really got abused by some bad dudes, including Hitler, of course, and Nietzsche being German. That's, it was just a few years down the road, Hitler came along. So one of the things that drove that was Nietzsche would look at the ideals of Christianity, and Jesus would say things like turn the other cheek, right? Or be meek, be humble, don't show off. And Nietzsche was looking at that, and he saw an ethos, an ethic, the moral guidance of docility, of weakness, if you will, and what he thought humans needed was actually how do I say this? What he expected we needed was an ethos, an ethic of power and will. Go out, do things, make things happen. Not necessarily cruel, right? But go and do and achieve things. And when you think about the late 1800s with Europeans taking over the globe, with the American continent opening up, with the first locomotives being driven east to west. I mean, I can't help but think of it as an American, but that's me. Tying the east and the west coast together. This was an era of enormous strides forward, and those aren't strides made by docile, timid people. And so the Übermensch was, the person who, would be able to enact his will upon the world, and in so doing, help move the world forward. Now, interestingly, that ties into mid-century philosopher / novelist Ayn Rand with her idea of objectivism. That's a whole nother conversation. But I don't recall anything overtly religious or anti-religious really in her work, but I could be wrong. But that idea that it's a heroic individual who strives and achieves something, and that ends up helping everybody. It's very much the ethos of capitalism. But anyway, so there's there's Nietzsche. Nietzsche sounds anti-religious, and maybe he actually was. But when Nietzsche says God is dead, he means we just don't expect that we need that in our community, in our lives, the way that we once did. And when he is talking about the Uberman, he's talking about moving beyond meek, passive Christian morality. So that's Nietzsche. Now Weber. So we spent a whole couple of sessions on Weber talking about religion in his idea of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Backing up a little bit, and just to restate, part of what's going on there is that Weber is saying that this religious model, or this model of thought that we get from religion, and I want to return to this with Rodney Stark later in this discussion, but this religious model of thought that comes from religion ends up working its way into the way we think about money and business, to the point where you end up with American capitalism that is itself a derivation of that. Maybe not a derivation, but an enervation. That's why he uses the spirit, right? The life force of that Protestant thought enlivening American, I say American, but industrial capitalism, which after Weber we really succeeded at, excelled at. So we've got that, and that's countering Marx explicitly, right? So instead of the economy drives religion or culture, here's religion, i.e. culture, driving the economy, right? But there's another layer to Weber, which is actually kind of interesting, which we didn't talk about, and it's in some of his other writings as well. And that's how authority works in religions. So, and I think this is kind of fun and interesting because you see it in lots of organizations, not just religious ones. But if you think about Christianity, for instance, you've got Jesus, clearly a charismatic guy, wandering around the desert. He's like, hey, I got an idea. It came from God. Why don't you hang out with me? And he gets these mobs of people he gets 12 of them to follow him around on a regular basis. And everywhere he goes, mobs of people want to come see and hear his message. Clearly charismatic. And people say, the Pharisees are always trying to trip him up on these rules. You did this, you did that. And he's like, you guys are missing the point. It's not the rules. They say, the commandments. And he says, yeah, that's the old covenant. The new covenant is love your neighbor as yourself, right? So Jesus does not appear to be a rules person. But it's hard to, you wouldn't have Christianity being one of the big religions in the world today if there weren't rules to go along with it. Where does that come from? Well, eventually you have people like Paul come along and start saying, well, this is what Jesus meant, dunk, 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 and starts laying out all of that's, then the rules start to come along. Which is kind of funny, right? So Weber is going to talk about charismatic authority and, let's say, rational or bureaucratic authority. Now, the early church was not organized in like a bureaucracy like we're thinking of in today's world, but there was the development of structure to the organization that started with Paul that Jesus didn't have anything to do with. Another example is with Mormonism, right? You don't go to Joseph Smith University, you go to Brigham Young University, right? But the kernel of Mormonism starts with Joseph Smith. He's got his plates, he's got his talking hat, he's got his settlers who are his followers who follow him from New York to Missouri, and then Missouri out west. But the development of the religion actually starts to come from Brigham Young, and which is who BYU is named after. And what Brigham Young ends up doing is helping build out that structure that the charismatic leader started. And so that's a fun kind of pattern to see with that you get from Weber. This, a charismatic person can start something, but they're not great at making it stick, right? You need an organization person. I feel like you see it in business. Sometimes you'll see folks who are sole proprietors, right? They've got this idea, they're gonna, do whatever it was. I can think of one person in particular, but I wouldn't want to. I won't pick on him. But they'll have this idea. They'll start it. They'll start making a little bit of money. It's working. But then they'll have a new idea, or they're still focused on what it is that people like about them, and you need like an actual business person to come along and build structure onto something, so that it can grow and it can become something larger. I wonder if Jobs and Wozniak fit this model. I'd have to give it some thought. I'm not sure. But it's interesting. So it's there. All right, so we did Marx. We did Nietzsche very badly. Go look up Nietzsche on your own. We did Weber with the Protestant ethic and the charismatic and rational authority. So that leads me to Durkheim. And then I'll finish a little bit with Stark. So with Durkheim, let's back up a little bit. So with Durkheim talked about mechanic and rational organization, solidarity, right? And not rational, mechanic and organic solidarity. So the organic solidarity is where people tend to have similar mindsets, right? They tend to have a similar moral worldview. They tend to have a similar read on reality, which sounds crazy, but it matters. So there you go. And he contrasted that, and for him that was a pre-modern, if you will, kind of worldview, and then a more modern worldview, and these aren't ideal types, this is like a gradient. A more modern worldview is one where we don't necessarily have the same moral and ethical foundation, or we don't necessarily have the same perspective or read on reality, but we do require each other economically, and we use money as a way to abstract and hold all of those relationships together. And so, one of those is clear. The second one is clearly how a big city works, and the first one is going to be a little more small town. Okay. And that's not to me, like offensive in any way, shape, or form. It's capturing the difference. Okay, so what does that mean for religion? Well, as I think about it, and all right, one more step. The conscience collective, the collective consciousness, and I don't know if French differentiates between consciousness and conscience, and it's kind of interesting if they work together. But the collective consciousness, collective conscience is kind of the social psychology of our whole group. So in a religious group, and I'm going out on a limb here to say this, I'd have to triple check in Durkheim, but in a religious community, you're going to be closer to that tribal mindset, or that that the small community mindset than you are the large one. And that's important because that means that in a religious community, you're going to have a more of a shared read on reality than in the outside world. You're going to have more of a shared set of moral understandings of the world. You're going to have a shared set of obligations, and that shouldn't be too surprising. That out in the world, you deal with people who have a different moral understanding all the time, right? One example is you may not believe in sex before marriage. You may not believe in divorce, and when you go to buy gas, the person at the counter may be actually in a polyamorous relationship, right? And the two of you clearly have very different understandings of the morality surrounding sex, the roles surrounding gender, but you do just fine, right? Now, are you likely to be in the same church? Probably not, right? And so put that in mind there. The collective consciousness of a small community is kind of what I want to get into here. And there are like offshoots that delve into all of this other stuff that maybe we've talked about, maybe we haven't. But recognizing or recall, I think I said this early on in the semester, for Durkheim, community is almost defined by that collective consciousness. And what do I mean by that? How do I want to say this? This is actually the whole, this is where Durkheim gets to be fun in Deviance class. But essentially, if we have a shared understanding of expectations of behavior, right, then when somebody breaks the rules of that behavior, you get pissed, right? And if somebody breaks the rules enough, we'll, as a community, work on sanctioning that person. And so belonging to a community is defined by what kind of behavior we accept and tolerate and expect, and what kind of behavior gets sanctioned, right? And you can see how the range of behaviors tolerated is going to be smaller in a community with a stronger sense of a shared worldview, right? And that kind of makes sense. If I've mentioned to you guys that I grew up Catholic and know a little bit about it. If I was gay and I wanted to marry a man, I could not do so in the Catholic Church because the Catholic says we don't marry gay people. You don't get to be married in our church if you want to be Catholic and gay. Now, that's a much stricter sense of belonging than a state marriage where for 10 years or so, gay marriage is acceptable, right? And so the state, which really only needs, do we murder, do we not murder? Big rules, right? Do we pay our bills and fulfill our contracts? Is going to, what gets sanctioned at the state level is a much broader range of behavior than what gets tolerated at something like your smaller religious level. that polyamorous gas station attendant may have a very entertaining sex and relationship life, but they're, you know, theoretically at least not supposed to participate um, in in Catholic rites, right? As a matter of fact, the main act of Catholicism is your weekly going to church and taking communion, which is literally being in the body of the church and consuming the body of Christ, which is a metaphor for the body of the church, right? We're saying we're all one body here, but you can sit in the audience, but you can't. You don't get to take communion, because if you're living in a state of sin, you don't get to take communion. It's kind of fascinating how it works. Okay, so where was I going with that? So your community is defined by who you allow in, who you allow out, and that's directly tied to what behavior you allow, what behavior you sanction, and all of that is tied to kind of the way that you to your shared, if you will, worldview with the rest of your community members. So, and I'm saying all this because I don't see Durkheim separating out how churches work versus other organizations, and I don't think he does, but how churches work as a function of community is absolutely built in to the way Durkheim thinks about things. So Durkheim doesn't have to say religion XYZ, because in saying society XYZ, he's saying religion does that. Now, there is one place where he is very explicit about that, and that is, oh, bummer, I don't have it down here, I don't think. The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, which is a big fat book. And I'll see if I can find a piece of it, a selection to put in to the class space. But it's a big fat book, and what he does is now recall this is 100 years ago and then some, so this is going to sound a little old-fashioned, but he wants to go look at quote-unquote primitive religions to try and understand the core of what religion is doing. And so he goes and he finds, and he doesn't go himself, he goes and gets all of the ethnographic work he can find on, I want to say the Australian Aborigines. I'm 90% sure that's who it is. And he's looking at these ethnographies and trying to understand how it is they are doing and experiencing religion. And he goes through this whole book. He writes a lot about it, blah, 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 en français, blah, blah. And he works his way around to, so he works his way around to the idea that, or he kind of decides that the idea of God is actually an abstract of community itself. And so in partaking in religion, you are partaking in your community, okay? And so let's think that through a little bit. So your big ontological questions, the ones that make philosophy fun, where do we come from? What persists after we die? Why are we here? What makes a good life? How should we behave? Those are all questions that religion and God not just provide answers to. I mean, religion does say you should behave like this, although I never really understood the people that said, well, how could there be atheists? Why would an atheist ever behave morally? I'm always kind of like, you need the threat of God to actually behave morally? What's that say about you? But anyway, so it is kind of fascinating, the individual versus community element that's hinted at here, that the idea of God lets you get at. Modern humans are amazing, especially compared to chimpanzees and gorillas. We study them. Sometimes they can do sign language. Some things they can do faster and better than us. But they don't tell jokes. They don't have, they don't, they didn't invent algebra and calculus. They didn't, they're just, it's not the same. So where in the last million years of evolution did humans get to be better? It's better, quote unquote, better. It's a mystery, right? I always kind of wondered, like with things like psychedelic mushrooms, who was the first person that said, I'm going to try that mushroom and see if it doesn't kill me, and then had an acid trip? Like, where does that come from? But it is kind of true. The world such that we're inhabiting, where does it come from, right? And religion gives answers, science gives non-answers, but we really don't know. Well, it kind of works for community too, right? Where do we get? We can see languages change and evolve in real time slowly, but where does the first thought come from? Like, I have ideas, but I got them from reading other people's books. Where did they get their ideas? So the experience of being human is one where we jump into this ongoing stream. We don't know anything about the stream. We get our life from this stream. Like, this is me, this stream is my community. And then what happens when we die? Well, it'd be nice to die and go to heaven and see grandma, right? But that's a guess. So what do we leave behind if you don't know about that? Well, we leave behind the children we had, the lives we touched, the books we wrote, the paintings we painted. Anything we've added to the culture moves along with us, right? So the something that came before us that religion tries to answer is our community. The something that persists after that religion gives us an answer for is our community, right? And yes, okay. And so if you go back to that Catholic ritual of communion that I mentioned, when you go to communion, you talk about the body of Christ, you talk about the body of church. When you and going to Mass on a weekly basis is not optional in Catholicism. You must go, and you literally eat the body of Christ. Catholics are cannibals. It's not a symbol, right? So you're participating in the body of the church, eating the body of Christ. You are literally becoming one with Christ and the church all together at the same time, right? So when Durkheim would look at these dancing ceremonies and rituals that the Aborigines had, they would get possessed by the totem of their tribe. If it was a lizard or something, and they would tell you that they had, they weren't acting a lizard. They really believed they were possessed by the lizard, and but the lizard is the totem of their tribe, right? So they're being possessed by the spirit, the element of their tribe, in kind of the same. I mean, not exactly the same way, but in the same way that the Catholic is being one with his or her community. It's really kind of wild. And then when you think about, okay, so what are most of our religious rituals? Well, again, I'll roll with Catholicism because that's what I know, but you'll find these in, some flavor of this in most other Christian religions and in most religions. But, and all of these have, like, there's a theological justification that somebody else can worry about. I'm going to focus on the social meaning of these. So, you want to, when a baby is born, you need to get it baptized for religious reasons. But another way to read that is you're presenting that baby to inclusion in your community, right? Here is baby Fred. Baby Fred is ours. And then the community, you baptize the baby in front of your friends and family and the church community. That baby's now a part of your community, right? You do First Communion and reconciliation around second grade. I don't know about reconciliation, but with communion, you're, like I said, you're learning to partake in your group as as you're getting along, getting more mature. Now you can partake in this ritual of the church, and then somewhere around 7th grade, 8th grade, passing puberty. I want to say about the same time the Jewish folks would have their bar and bat mitzvahs. You're going to have holy brain fart, Batman. Confirmation. And in confirmation, you stand in front of your church community as an adult now, or at least a proto-adult, and you say, these are the things I believe, right? And you keep on going down the line when it comes time to get married. The whole point of a marriage is that you're presenting yourself in front of the community as a couple. And that comes with community recognized sexual and behavioral rights and responsibilities to each other and to the community. Which is kind of fascinating because when you think about it, all of these rituals, not all of the rituals, but many of these rituals have some form of civic equivalent, because of course the civic is another way we do our community, right? When a baby's born, you got to get a birth certificate, or I don't know, maybe you don't exist, and that birth certificate it says you're a part of the state of Georgia, a part of the United States. You get to 16, you get a driver's license. I guess the youngins nowadays are waiting till maybe a little older, 18. But getting a driver's license is a lot like confirmation in that it's a symbol of inclusion into the broader world. We've built our world around cars such that if you don't have a driver's license, you are going to have a hard time being a fully engaged citizen. How are you going to get to work? How are you going to get to vote? How are you going to get to buy your groceries? Very, very challenging without an actual driver's license. And that driver's license is also doubles as your national ID card. I mean, that's not the way we would talk about it because we don't like those things politically, but it is the card that'll allow you to vote. It is the card that'll allow you to travel, to get into bars, whatever. When you get married, you go and you have a judge or a minister of the peace or whomever, really. But what you're doing is you're signing a contract that says, this is a marriage contract, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and you're getting it certified at the court that you are at. And what does that contract include? It includes specified sexual and behavioral expectations for the two of you. And if you think about it, like, what's the difference between being married and just shacking up? You don't have to get married to move in together. You don't have to get married to have sexual relationships with each other. So what's going on there? Well, the answer really comes down to the role of the community. If if you don't get your if you don't get a marriage certificate, you might be living together, but you're just having sex, at least in the eyes of the state. If you do get your marriage certificate, then you have fairly well defined legal uh, rights and responsibilities to each other. You get to be each other's next of kin if somebody dies. You get to share your finances if money comes or if money goes. You you are authorized to make medical decisions if one or the other is incapacitated. All of that gets much, much, much more difficult if you don't get married. I mean, for all of the for all of the romance involved in marriage and all of the expensive weddings, the point really is that that those obligations to each other, that contract you signed with each other. And it was a big problem for gay couples before the state would marry them, right? Especially having gone through the AIDS crisis. If you are a couple and you've been together for 20 years and somebody dies, well, sometimes it was estranged family members who were being brought in to make decisions, not sometimes, often, because they were the ones that had the legal right to make decisions about the sick person, not their partner of 5, 10, 20 years, however long. Now, if you think about it, though, if you are in a community if you were a gay couple and you lived in a gay-friendly community and your friends and family there recognized you, then your coupleship stood in front of that small community of your friends and family, but it didn't hold legally and it wouldn't hold religiously, right? And so all of that is to say that when Durkheim starts thinking about the things that people use religion for, what he sees is actually religion being an abstraction of the community and God the epitome of the idea of that abstraction, right? So, which is just, to me, I love. It's fascinating. Okay, so let me say, I don't know, man, that was not a short one. I wanted to say something about Rodney Stark, but okay, I'll tag this on for those that want to stay late. So, Rodney Stark is, and there's just one thing I want to say about him. Rodney Stark is or was a recent sociologist of religion, and was very prolific in the 90s and early 2000s. But one of the things that is intriguing that I liked about him, got a kick out of, was, and this is going to be politically incorrect in today's world, but Stark wondered why did the Europeans do so well in the 16, 17, 1800s in terms of science and development and stuff like that. Well, there's an element of, we talked a little bit about this with Weber, but Weber, in recognizing the pattern of thought in Protestantism, that you work hard, you work for the sake of work, you deny yourself excess pleasures, not excess, you actually live monkly, and then that allows you to reinvest your money into what you're doing. That's the same pattern of thought that runs capitalism. and I may have said this before, but I think it's kind of fascinating because you see we Americans, and I don't know, maybe everyone does, but I want to say we Americans tend to apply that to really whatever pattern we have. Uh, if you follow any debate online, more than 7 posts about why is somebody fat, it's obvious everyone knows how not to be fat, but somehow everyone's still fat, and I don't know. But clearly you need to, work out more, right? You need to move more. You need to stop eating comfort foods, and you keep on going that way, and then that will build the cycle that will get you healthy. You had to eat shredded wheat and get up at 5 a.m. and cold plunge and go work out. I don't know. But you can see that it's the same. Work hard, deny your comforts, and then reinvest whatever you have and keep going that way. Well, another one of those, and I think I said this with Marx actually, in Christianity, you've got this kind of linear up or down trajectory to life, right? You can be a good person or be saved or predestined, whatever you want to say, but you be a good person and life goes here, you die, you go to heaven, and the story's over. Or you be a bad person or don't be saved or don't be predestined and you go here and you get to hell and the story's over. We see elements of that when we say, oh, climate change is getting worse, and the world's going to burn and we're all going to die. Or we say, technology is getting better, AI is getting better, we'll find free energy and then we'll all live like Star Trek or something. And, maybe we'll get to live like Star Trek. Maybe the Earth will burn up in climate change. I don't have the answers to that, but I do recognize that linear extrapolation to an endpoint of utter wonder or utter devastation. You can see that element of thought in Christianity, and so Marx does that, right? The world sucks for proletarians. We'll move to socialism, things will be better. We'll evolve to communism, and it'll be after history, right? It's funny because as much as Marx was against religion, that sounds fairly like a religious pattern, especially if socialism is something like purgatory on the way to heaven. You non-Catholics are going to have to go look up purgatory. Okay, so Stark. What I liked about Stark is he took a couple of elements from Christian thought and made the argument that those elements were what allowed for technological development in the latter half of the thousands century millennia that led to the world where we are today. Now, I don't know enough about Islam, and by enough I mean I don't know anything, but in the book that I'm thinking of, Stark makes the argument that in Islam, Muhammad was perfect, and everyone that follows degrades a little bit. So the farther we are from Muhammad, the farther we are from perfection, which is kind of like your, well, anyway, I was going to say genetics from when you're a baby, but that's really far afield. So for him, he would say that it's not, well, so we'll just leave that there. Christianity, on the other hand, works in a different way. Again, at least in Catholicism, but I want to say across Christianity, you can have continued revelation, even if it's not like an epiphany of revelation, it's through time we can know more about God. As the church develops, flawed though it may be, we can know more about, we can get closer to God that way. Through our lives, we can be better and get closer to God. There's an element of continual development that is allowed for in Christianity, that if your basic mythology says we're only degrading, just it won't be compatible. So that element of allowing for continued progress, and then combine that with the how do we get that continued progress? Well, we get it through study, right? We study the Bible, we study the philosophers, we study Augustine and Comte, and try and we're going to keep striving to improve our knowledge so that we can get closer and closer to the truth, God, whatever we want to call it. And so Stark is taking these two elements that are inherent to Christianity and saying that once you take that those currents of thought, those patterns of thought, allow for exactly the kind of scientific and technical progress, or how about this? They create the foundations for continual scientific and technical progress that that led to the 1500s to 2000s. Now, why do I say that that's on PC? Well, for a number of reasons, and being a little bit contrarian is probably why I liked the book, at least a little bit. But in today's world, it's not. In today's world, you would be very, very careful to say, actually, he's careful not to say that, for instance, Christianity is better than Islam. What he is saying is that these different patterns of thought led to different outcomes. And that's politically safe. But in today's world, while indeed I like my Samsung phone and being able to talk to you guys today, and air conditioning and all of that nice technical stuff, the human suffering of the last 500 years just can't be swept under the rug of, see my new iPhone? And so anybody who is bumping up against a question of why are things, quote unquote, better